All right, welcome. As many of you know, I'm Deborah Satz, and along with Paul Brest, I'm an instructor for this class. I'm also a philosophy professor, and Paul is an emeriti law professor. And this is our second time teaching the class. Kaisa Goodman serves as our teaching fellow, and we also have section leaders for those who've been enrolled in the class for an extra unit. Since these classes are put up for public viewing and because people drop in for specific classes, I'm going to recap the aims of the class. Then after I do that, Paul will introduce today's topics and today's speakers. So what's the class about? Deep disagreement pervades our democracy, from arguments over immigration, taxation, foreign policy, reparations, the Middle East crisis, and indeed to the function of higher education and the value of free speech itself. As I have often said in this room, such disagreement by itself is not a cause for concern. We should expect in a democratic society, one not ruled by a king or an autocrat, that is a society based on the equal freedom and status of its members, reasonable people will disagree about many things. Some of the deepest questions of morality, religion, and value are hard to think through. Even people who are well-motivated and conscientious will answer these questions in different ways, perhaps because of their different life experiences, or because the facts are hard to pin down and admit of different interpretations, or because they make different trade-offs among competing values. Disagreement is a feature of democratic societies and not a bug. But not all disagreements are productive. Sometimes people fail to consider inconvenient facts, or they close their minds to evidence and reasoning that doesn't support their view. Sometimes a culture of incivility prevails with respect to those with whom we disagree. And by incivility, I'm not talking about politeness. I'm talking about the failure to treat other people with respect simply because they hold different views on matters that we care about. Such incivility is all around us, and we need better kinds of public discussion. So in thinking about incivility, I want to remind people and say a bit about what happened in this class last week. Some people think that civil discourse is not sufficient for advancing knowledge or producing change. And we agree. Protest is also a way of addressing your fellow citizens, but it's reasonably subject to time and place restrictions. There are many spaces on this campus available for protest and other kinds of action, but this space is not one of them, although it is a space for difficult and sometimes hard conversations. Last week, an outside group disrupted 12 minutes of this class. None of the disruptors were Stanford students, and those who took the stage were served with notices that they're banned from campus and were pursuing legal penalties with the county DA. Paul and I were upset about the interruption, but we were heartened by the audience response of our students, which strongly supported letting our class proceed. Because of this event, we now have a member of our public safety in the room with us. That's unfortunate, but it is a fact of life at the moment. This is in no way meant to chill your speech. Please do ask hard questions and continue to think outside the box. And now I'll turn it over to Paul to introduce this week's session.
Before introducing today's guests, I should confess that both Deborah and I are deeply ignorant about college athletics. We flipped a coin to decide who would moderate today's conversation. Most of my knowledge about college football comes from a couple of hours tutorial from Condi Rice about 35 years ago, when I was dean of the law school and she was provost. A law student's father, who was president of the San Francisco 49ers, offered to host a fundraising event for the school. Condi was deeply concerned about my ignorance and thought it would embarrass the university, and therefore invited my wife, Iris, and me to a college game, Stanford against University of Washington. She sat us on either side of her and talked us through the game. That was the first and last game I have ever seen. But fortunately, it's today's guests and not the moderator who are going to bring expertise to the conversation. In preparing to introduce Condoleezza Rice, I realized that most of you are familiar with her roles in government service, but that you may be less familiar with her academic history and her roles as a scholar and university leader. So let me briefly introduce Dr. Rice rather than Secretary Rice. Dr. Rice has degrees both from the University of Denver and Notre Dame. Her first book, The Soviet Union and the Czechoslovak Army, published in 1985, was based on her PhD dissertation. Subsequent books include the co-authored To Build a Better World, Choices to End the Cold War and Create a Global Commonwealth, focusing on the unification of Germany, and more recently, Democracy, Stories from the Long Road to Freedom, a sweeping look at the global struggle for democracy and why America must continue to support the cause of human freedom. What began many years ago as a postgraduate fellowship at Stanford became a professorship in our political science department and later at the Graduate School of Business, where she directed the Global Center for Business and the Economy. Dr. Rice also has a distinguished career in academic administration, serving as Stanford's provost from 1993 to 1999, and currently, of course, as director of the Hoover Institution, whose academic programs and connections with the rest of the university have grown monumentally under her leadership. What are Condoleezza Rice's connections with today's topic? She's a lifelong sports person with great skills in golf and an avid sports fan. After her tenure as Secretary of State, she was approached to become a Pac-10 commissioner. Perhaps we'll talk about what remains of that organization later on today. But she chose instead to return to Stanford. She was inaugural member of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee and is part owner of the Denver Broncos. So I'm going to flip the focus in introducing Pam Karlan. I imagine that many of you are more familiar with her work as a law professor and as a leading legal scholar on voting rights and constitutional law, as well as antitrust, as we'll learn today, than with her public service. So Professor Karlan has an undergraduate and law degree from Yale University. After graduation, she was a law clerk for then U.S. District Judge Abraham Sofaer, who by coincidence is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. She then clerked for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun. Justice Blackmun, not his former law clerk, revealed that she had crafted his powerful dissent in Bowers versus Hardwick, which upheld Georgia's sodomy law, which fortunately was overruled 17 years later. After beginning her teaching career at the University of Virginia Law School, Pam joined the Stanford faculty, where she's now Kenneth and Harl Montgomery Professor of Public Interest Law. As for public service, Pam was an attorney for the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. She served as U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Voting Rights in the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and then as Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division. She was also a member of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. Pam co-founded the law school's Supreme Court Litigation Clinic, through which students litigate actual cases before the Supreme Court, and she herself has argued at least 10 cases. Particularly noteworthy among these was Bostock versus Clayton County, a landmark case in which the court held that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects employees against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And she's also the author of the main reading assignment for today, The the fix-ain't-in athletics and the university in the post-Alston era. Our two guests will be discussing the current state of college athletics, especially sports like football that have become increasingly professionalized. How did we get here? What does here look like? What are the consequences for the university's core missions and for the students' athletes' well-being and their futures? And what, if anything, should we try to change and how? So before asking Pamela Karlan first and then Condoleezza Rice second to talk, let's put up the poll question, and we'll do the poll once again at the end of their presentation. You're going to speak from your seats, which is just great. As soon as we're done with the poll question, I think we'll put up the response also, and then Pam can go. So we have 71% yes, student athletes should be able to profit, and 29% no. Over to you.
Great. So it's really a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be back on stage with Condi. I think like every 3 or 4 years we get together to talk about something, and I always learn something important from what she has to say. In answering the question that was put to you, my central argument is going to be that in recent years the nature of college athletics has changed profoundly, and these changes, I'm going to argue, mean that at least some college athletes should profit from their sports, even while they're students. But before I get to that, I have two observations. One is about Stanford, and one's about the wider world of colleges. First, I don't know exactly when Stanford started giving athletic scholarships to male athletes, but I know that it did start giving them to female athletes in 1978. So that's a pretty established practice at Stanford, and those students are already profiting from their participation. If you believe what the U.S. Department of Education says, every one of those athletic scholarships is worth $87,833 because that's what the pre-need cost of Stanford is in a year. And we don't give scholarships like that to anybody else for what they excelled in or what they're going to do while they're here. We don't give talented undergraduate debaters scholarships or talented undergraduate musicians scholarships or like. And we differ, I think, here from most of our peer institutions, which is the Ivy League institutions don't give scholarships, Caltech doesn't, MIT doesn't, but we do. So in thinking about today's question, I don't think we should be limited to be asking whether we should pay athletes on top of that initial $87,000. I actually think what we should be doing is asking whether we should stop giving this economic benefit to athletes altogether. And the second question I want to say, second observation I want to make is that in thinking about this question with respect to Stanford, we might be asking a very different question than with regard to most of the other schools that engage in the level of athletic competition that we do. Stanford differs from many of our competitor institutions in the fact that we take our academic mission for our athletes seriously. Our athletes all major in real subjects, and they almost entirely graduate from college. There are a number of other schools, though, that we compete with that, at which athletes take sham courses, they major in pseudo subjects, and they leave school in droves without graduating. Whatever the arguments are for paying Stanford athletes, I think those arguments are actually a lot stronger when it comes to paying students who aren't trading their bodies for some kind of education at all. So let me turn now to why I think this is a big question today and what the changes have been recently in college athletics. After the Supreme Court decided a case in 1984 that involved the right of the University of Oklahoma to sell its own TV package for games, money absolutely flooded the system. The Power Four conferences, they used to be the Power Five. Probably one of the best career moves you made was not becoming, not becoming head of Pac-12. But the four major conferences now, the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12, each have broadcast contracts that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. The Final Four is $1 billion television thing every year. So where does that money go? Well, for the most part, over the last 30 years, it's largely gone into coaches' salaries and into athletic facilities. By 2019, the highest paid state employee in 40 of the 50 states in this country was either the men's basketball coach or the men's football coach. The same was true of private institutions, places like Duke, USC, Vanderbilt, and Stanford, where, if you believe Stanford's 2023 I-990 form, which they gave to the federal government, we paid $7 million that year to David Shaw to be the head coach of the football team. So in 2014, a group of athletes, present and former athletes at these schools, began a class action lawsuit against the NCAA, which governs college sports, and against the 11 major conferences, saying that they wanted to challenge the limits on their compensation because all of this money's flowing into the system, but it's not going to the people who are on the field. And after a suit challenging rules that limited or prohibited benefits like paying for tutoring or paying for graduate school or for internships, after that lawsuit succeeded and the handwriting seemed to be on the wall that a lawsuit challenging the compensation system altogether might win, the NCAA suspended the key provision of its bylaws forbidding college athletes from signing so-called name, image, and likeness deals. And the availability of these name, image, and likeness deals, these NIL deals, brought in even more money to the system. So in the year after NIL deals were legitimized, $915 million was spent on these deals. And now, in the wake of another round of settlements of antitrust lawsuits involving college sports, schools in the major conferences have agreed to outright revenue sharing with their student athletes. Under the proposed settlement, they're going to have to give 22% of the revenue that comes in, which is about $20 million a year per school, to students who play sports. So as a factual matter, lots of student athletes are being paid, and they're going to be paid. But should they be paid? I see a strong argument that they should, at least by schools that prioritize the student's sport over the student's education. And that can happen even at a place like Stanford, and I'll just give you one example of that, which is Paul and I both teach a course that's a semi-mandatory course for freshmen here at Stanford. It's a course called Citizenship in the 21st Century. It meets 18 times in the quarter, or 18 times in the quarter. And the whole point of this class, like the class that we're in here, is to have discussions about difficult issues in which students interact with students who are different from them in various ways, and they talk about important issues. But we've been told that a number of varsity athletes who are freshmen are going to miss 6 of the 18 classes in order to travel with their teams during the course of the quarter. Now, no other students at Stanford would be permitted to miss 6 of the 18 classes, and it wouldn't matter how committed they are to their extracurricular activity, they wouldn't be allowed to do it. But when it comes to the athletes, not only are they allowed to do this, but we're required to accommodate them when they miss class in order to travel to the East Coast to play basketball against Clemson or to swim against UVA. Now, why is it that the university treats the athletes here differently? Well, presumably because they think the athletes are representing the university in a way that other students engaged in other kinds of extracurriculars aren't. But if they are demanding that these students represent the university, in a sense, we should treat what these students are doing as their job in the same way that when any one of us goes someplace else, it's part of our job, and we should pay the students the same way we pay research assistants or teaching fellows or the like. Once we look beyond Stanford, though, things are even starker. And while the audience for college sports may be people who have a deep connection because of their academic relationship to an institution, that's no longer true of the athletes. Again, in the shadow of antitrust law, the NCAA got rid of restrictions that prevented players from transferring and then immediately playing for a new school. In 2023, more than 1,200 men's basketball players, enough to fill 80 full rosters of basketball teams, transferred to a school where they were going to get an athletic scholarship. A majority of the players in the starting lineups of the teams in the NCAA Final Four were on their second school, and a number of those folks were on their third school. Stanford's #1 women's softball pitcher left Stanford to go to Texas Tech because of a $1.2 million NIL deal. Now, I don't think any of these people is making these moves for academic reasons. I don't mean to sound snobby, but the likelihood that somebody would transfer from Stanford to Texas Tech because they'd be getting a better education there is probably pretty low. So put simply, the players on power conference teams no longer need to be amateurs in any meaningful sense, nor need they to have any real meaningful relationship to the school whose jersey they're wearing. So where does that leave us? I think we need to choose between a world in which we have the kind of college sports we now have, where I think the argument is we should pay the players, and a world in which we don't pay the players, but we also operate a different kind of athletic program, one that is lower key and more focused on the athletes as students than the students as athletes. Institutions like Stanford or Berkeley, UVA, Michigan, and the like, we produce a number of different products, if you will. And our primary product, the primary product that we produce is research and a new generation of scholars. That's quite distinct from college sports, amateur or otherwise. And what's the relationship between that primary mission of the university and sports? Well, the connection between high-level research and high-revenue sports is entirely a historical accident. Great universities elsewhere in the world don't operate anything even remotely like the system that we do. But does a high-level athletics program of the kind that really argues that we should be paying the players because that's their job somehow contribute to a university's research and educational missions? To begin with, athletics revenues largely stay in athletics departments. So in fiscal year 2023, the football bowl series teams, the major college sports teams, had total revenues of roughly $10.6 billion. They transferred back to the general funds of their universities less than 0.5% of those revenues. And in an awful lot of schools, Berkeley being the nearest one to us, the general student funds are being used to fund the athletic department. That is, the athletic department doesn't even fund itself. Now, to be sure, there's a rich literature on whether having a successful sports program has some effect on factors like donations to a school or applications or test scores of admitted students. And it may be that some of you came to Stanford rather than going to an equally good educational institution because you wanted to watch sports or you wanted to play them. But for every team that wins a game, there's obviously a team that loses. And there's relatively little evidence that having a losing sports program actually improves a school's donations or its applications or the like. And there's a fair amount of scholarship that suggests that recruited athletes differ from their classmates along a number of different parameters. And that's true at the Ivy Leagues as well as here, that recruited athletes can be quite different. They may major in less rigorous subjects. They may underperform their academic predictors. They place less emphasis on achievements in arts and sciences, and they do little to increase the socioeconomic diversity of their institutions. The data suggests, actually, that as a group, athletes awarded scholarships in big-time sports are more likely to come from advantaged backgrounds than their non-athletic peers. Finally, there's what legal scholar and judge Guido Calabresi calls the gift of the evil deity. As Guido tells the story, he teaches a torts class, and torts, for those of you who don't recognize the term, is basically the class about when bad things happen to good people. It's like just one accident and tragedy after the next. And so Guido, in his torts class, asks the students to imagine that they're the president of the country or they're the person who runs the legal system, and a deity comes to them and offers to give them a gift. And the gift will make life more pleasant and more enjoyable than it is today. And the deity says, but if you take this gift, we're going to have 1,000 young men and young women every year who are going to die agonizing, horrible deaths, and we're going to just pick these people at random. And then Guido says to the students, would you take this deal? And the students all say, of course not, we wouldn't take this deal. And then Guido springs the trap and says, well, that's the automobile. You've all taken that deal. What then about sports and the university? The National Institutes of Health tells us that football players and soccer players as well are at risk of chronic traumatic encephalopathy because of repeated blows to their heads. The symptoms of this untreatable condition include memory loss, depression, impaired judgment, anxiety, dizziness, trouble balancing, and suicidal tendencies. Now, the central ambition of any university, I think, is to find the best brains it can and educate them to serve as leaders and as explorers during lifelong careers. But power conferences right now are giving 85 athletic scholarships a year to football players, knowing the heightened risk these students face of losing the very minds that the universities exist to educate. Can providing an audience with pleasant and enjoyable entertainment on brisk fall afternoons justify the risks that football creates? I don't think so. But if universities are going to impose those risks, the students on which they fall should share more fully in the wealth those sports produce. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks very much, and it is great to be with Pam again. And I find myself in agreement with some of what you've said. So let me focus on just a few points that I want to make, and then perhaps address the question that has been asked about professionalization and payment of athletes. It is absolutely true that the great research and teaching universities would still be great research and teaching universities if they did not play sports. But would they be the same places that they are if they did not play sports? Stanford has played football actually since the 1880s. It is a part of the fabric of the place. It is a part of the donor and alumni association with the place. And it is a part of making Stanford a quite more well-rounded university than some of our academic peers. We are actually not MIT. I was actually offered a job at MIT. I didn't take it. Not because of football, but because I actually like a well-rounded university. And by the way, we do a lot of things that are not directly related to the research and teaching mission. We have gaieties. That's not related. We have symphony for our students. That's not related. Unless you're a music major, we have concerts. That's not related. We have theater performances. That's not related. So in fact, the well-rounded university doesn't just do research and teaching. It gives a well-rounded experience to its students, which its alumni remember, and which actually does bring donors together. And I just want to say one thing about the donor point. And you're right to single out Stanford in some ways, but some of Stanford's most committed donors for the buildings that you see in the engineering quad are also some of the most committed donors to Stanford athletics. Now, I don't know which way that causal arrow goes, but there is something in that relationship. So don't underestimate the degree to which donors are willing to go to both, and in which one may actually influence the other. And the problem is we can't sort of pull them apart and see, and I'm afraid if we were able to pull them apart and could see, we might not look like what we would find. So the first point is, yes, we are research and teaching, but we are many, many other things as well. Secondly, the student in student athlete. I am in complete agreement that not every university has kept the value proposition at the basis of the intercollegiate athletic program. That value proposition was that you could be a great athlete and still get a great education. And I'm going to argue that we need a place where actually you can be both a great athlete and a great student. Do we really want to consign the Andrew Lucks of the world, who came here as valedictorian of his class, who was going to be the first pick in the NFL draft, but stayed an additional year so that he could finish his college degree? And that's the story, by the way, of many, many, many Stanford athletes over the years. There are doctors and lawyers, a senator in Cory Booker, who came here on athletic scholarships, and ended up doing very well in life. And I would argue that some of what they did as athletes helped that. Some of you know athletes. Their time management skills are amazing. Some of you know athletes. Their ability to persevere, to get up the next morning after a bad performance and keep going. That's one of life's lessons. They are student athletes who actually do manage, despite of all of the demands on them, to finish this university at the same, essentially the same level that their non-athletic peers do. Don't we want a place where you can be both a great athlete and a great student? I would argue, yes, we do. Now, I would have preferred that we were in the world in which the value proposition was, you come here as an athlete, you get to ply your trade, you get the best training and the best coaching and good nutrition, and you get a college degree. I actually chaired a commission for the NCAA on men's basketball. 59% of men's D1 basketball players think they're going to the NBA. The real number is 1.5%. You need a plan B. That would be called a college education. And while you are on full scholarship and getting all of those benefits, Joe Smith down the hall is taking down loans, and Joe Smith down the hall is working 20 hours a week. So I never bought the exploitation argument. A college degree is a good value proposition. And oh, by the way, if you get a college education, your earning potential over your lifetime is $1 million more. So the college education is worth something, but we're in a different world. As Pam has cited, a number of court cases led first to something called Alston, where athletes were allowed to get a small stipend in recognition of the fact that they couldn't work in the way that most students could. And then the big breakthrough was name, image, and likeness. Now let's unpack name, image, and likeness for one moment. The only students who were not able to benefit from their name, image, and likeness were athletes. If you were a Stanford music major who made a particularly popular video, you could benefit from it. If you were an influencer, of which there are many now, you can benefit from it. But Ohio State, a couple of decades ago, had three players suspended for simply selling their jerseys. So there was an inequality here. And name, image, and likeness, why shouldn't a student athlete be able to benefit from name, image, and likeness? Where it went off the rails was when name, image, and likeness got associated with the transfer portal. And here I'm in complete agreement with Pam. The idea that you can go to 3 different schools in 3 years and have anything approximating an academic experience is obviously not true. But the courts have said that that's possible. I'll come to at the end, maybe something that can be done about that. But the transfer portal with name, image, and likeness, come here and we will give you an NIL deal that is 10x what you can get at Stanford or at Notre Dame or wherever. That's a problem. I want to make 2 other points about intercollegiate athletics. I think you know that I value it. I think it is an important part of the American university, particularly places like Stanford. And oh, by the way, Stanford's different in other ways too than MIT and Harvard. Stanford's always had women in its classes. Stanford's first pioneer class actually had a black student. Do you know that? It was Mrs. Stanford's Coachman's son. And so Stanford is different, and one of the things that makes Stanford different is playing high-quality athletics and having high-quality academics. So I think we need a Stanford. But I want to give you a couple of other facts that cannot be ignored. It is true that athletic departments mostly take their money into the athletic department. It is also true that without the media rights, mostly associated with football, you would have no Olympic sports and you would have no Title IX. I was actually an athlete. I was a competitive figure skater. In my junior year, I decided I wanted to join a team at the University of Denver. There were 3 teams: tennis, which I did not play, golf, which I did not play, and gymnastics, Oh, well, I'd done vaulting and I'd done balance beam as a figure skater. I'm 5'8", I've got 5'10" legs, probably not a good gymnast, but I decided to join the gymnastics team in 1974. We had to have a bake sale in order to be able to go to Utah for a championship. Is that where you want women's sports to go back to? If you don't have a funding source for Olympic sports and for women's sports, and like it or not, in the modern system, it's football and media revenue that drives that. Now you could say, well, let's just endow the Olympic sports. That's about $1.5 billion to do that. Maybe we can get it done. I really rather doubt it. So if you want to see women's tennis and women's gymnastics and men's volleyball, then you're going to have to play football and have media rights. That's just a hard reality of today's athletic landscape. I want to make one point also about safety, and here I agree. I think there was not enough attention to this. There is now a lot of work on safety, particularly head injury. I myself had 2 concussions as a figure skater. Football is not the only sport in which people are concussed. And there's a lot of work going on around this issue. Unfortunately, a lot of sports, a lot of activities in life are actually pretty risky. And so I think doing the best you can to mitigate the risk is really an important element of running a sports program. Now, national legislation. That's what we need at this point. We need national legislation because things like the transfer portal cannot be dealt with without national legislation. If we had an antitrust exemption, we would know whether or not some of these stories about what money is going around were true. And we might be able to do something about the status of athletes in the university, because I think most people now recognize that we do not want student athletes to be employees, we want them to be students. So I do think there is work to do to make intercollegiate athletics a fundamental part of the university, but watching the Stanford experience, I think it can be done. And while the Stanford experience is somewhat unique, it is not completely unique. A lot of those universities that have big-time athletic programs also have a kid who comes in as a walk-on, who gets a scholarship 3 years in, who then ends up going to medical school and does just fine. To the point that a lot of student athletes are from wealthier families than their peers. I read that part. I think we call that statistical inference. I don't actually think that it is proven by the data that were demonstrated. It's actually something we could probably study, but I don't think it's really been studied. So, thanks very much.
Back to you, Pam.
So I think you see we have a bunch of places of agreement and a bunch of places of disagreement. And I think Condi is absolutely right. You know, I would have a very different feeling about the question we were asked to answer if every school were Stanford, but it's not. And I would have, I think, a somewhat different view if it weren't for the fact that and Connie's absolutely right that you can't run the kind of athletic program we're running here at the cost we're running it without having football. But I do think the costs of having football are substantial. And they're substantial in a couple of different ways. I remember when I was on the presidential search committee, when we picked John Hennessy, we went around the country and we talked to other schools. And one of the schools we talked to told us that there were only 4 schools then in the country: Stanford, Rice, Duke, and I think Notre Dame. They were the only schools in the country where the median score of recruited football players was over 1,000.
Well, and the academies.
Yeah,
the military academies.
Yeah, I wasn't counting the academies because their admissions are a totally different kind of system. And of course, when they're recruiting people, those people, if they stay and get the actual education, the likelihood of their playing pro sports is relatively low. I mean, you know, you get David Robinson and Roger Staubach, and that's about it. But I do think that the difficulty here is that we have this multi-billion-dollar industry that's now tied to educational institutions, and it's not entirely clear why it's tied to them in the way that it is. And that's what worries me, is that it distorts schools in a bunch of ways. Like, for example, the example I gave you earlier, which is we would never allow somebody in doing any other activity at the school to skip a third of the classes for a course and then pass a course that's a discussion seminar. We just wouldn't do it. And the question is, why do we do that for athletics when we don't do it for other things that students value? And I think it just shows some bad priorities.
If I could just say, though, that's actually, I hope, a temporary circumstance. Now, some of this was because of the move to the ACC. And while the move to the ACC was not my favorite thing, it was the ACC or the Mountain West once the Pac-12 collapsed. I think you will find that for the most part, with the exception of something like college, Stanford athletes do get their work done. They do attend classes. And I actually don't know, we could look at the numbers of those who don't play athletics who attend every class as well. But in any case, I think hopefully the one that you're talking about is temporary.
Yeah, but the very fact that we're in the ACC, which begins with an A, that has nothing to do with the fact that we're the P of the ACC.
Oh, it's the All-Coast Conference.
Yeah, the All-America Conference, yeah. I mean, it shows you something about how far college athletics have moved from what they started out as, which was part of being a well-rounded student at a well-rounded school.
I completely agree. I still think you have an awful lot of well-rounded students and not just at Stanford, right? My question is, sometimes if you want to get rid of something, you have to have an alternative. And right now, I don't see an alternative that allows, and the last point that I made about the breadth of a Stanford program. Stanford's program is 36 sports. So let's leave out football, which is the only one, by the way, that makes money. It's the only one. We could say, therefore, we will not have Title IX. We just won't have women's sports at that level. I think that would be a tragedy. We could say we won't have Olympians, 39 Stanford Olympians. We were right there between Canada and Germany in terms of our Olympic medal count. And we weren't the only ones. How many Olympians did you hear? Oh, University of Virginia, Cal, USC, Michigan. We would have no Olympic movement. So I just raised the question, if you're going to not do this, what are you going to do?
Well, I would be, I have to say, I would be perfectly satisfied with saying if the federal government wants the United States to have great Olympians, it should do what other countries do, which is subsidize those people directly rather than putting them in college.
The ones that do that very, very well are China, and it used to be the Soviet Union. I don't want to do that either.
No, I don't want to be China. I don't want to be the Soviet Union.
But those are the ones that subsidize.
Well, there are other countries that subsidize as well. The Scandinavian countries subsidize their teams.
They have
all
12
those people were in the army.
They have 12 people.
Well, but I think if you say, should we be taking from football players in order to subsidize water polo players or women's gymnasts or I think that raises a really interesting question about why it is. I mean, I understand what Title IX does. I spent a lot of time enforcing Title IX when I was at the Justice Department. And I think Title IX is really important. But we could have amateur sports here at Stanford. Yes, we mightn't produce the same number of Olympians, but I don't think that we can say that the Ivy League schools are not well-rounded or that the athletics departments there are not well-rounded or that the student experience there is not well-rounded. And they're not paying people to play their sports.
No, but let me just say a word about the Ivies, all right, because there's a little bit of a sleight of hand here. I went to the University of Denver. It was a national championship hockey school, right? I don't really think those hockey players at Cornell were there because they were on need-based admission. So I really wouldn't hold up the Ivies in quite the way that you have. But let me go back
Well,
to
I would get rid,
Yeah.
I would be perfectly happy if we go back to the kind of Bowen and Bach thing and we just get rid of intercollegiate athletics
Okay, well,
altogether.
now there's an idea. We'll just get rid of intercollegiate athletics, because if that's the only alternative, is you just get rid of intercollegiate athletics, then okay, maybe that's an argument. But I think you would lose a great deal if you got rid of intercollegiate athletics, not to mention the athletes who would like to get a good college education and play sports. And I want to go back to Title IX. The reason I gave you the story about the bake sale is that Title IX was my last year in college was the first year of Title IX. It was a fundamentally different experience for women than we have now. And I really don't want to go back to the days when they had bake sales to go to a competition.
Now, I don't want to go back to the days of bake sales either. I just do, I do think, though, that the system we have now is so deeply corrupt in a number of ways. It brings people to colleges they have no business being at, and I'm not talking about Stanford. I'm talking about the system as a whole, in which you look at people who go to 3 colleges and they learn nothing while they're in college, and they come out of college, and 30 years later, the concussions they had repeatedly, and the fact that in order to be a lineman on that team, we take 18-year-old boys and tell them they should weigh 325 pounds, and there is no 18-year-old boy in America who should weigh 325 pounds, and they don't lose that weight, and they have cardiac problems, they have joint problems, and saying, but they did this so that we could have a women's soccer team or a women's gymnastics
No, they
team.
did it because they loved playing football, right? That's why they did it. They didn't know the financials of supporting women's sports. You're right.
Right.
But you do have to recognize that there are some people who actually want to play the sport. And when they play the sport, there are certain risks associated with it. We do everything we can. We should be doing more to mitigate those risks. And we should be saying to the 18-year-old, build up slowly. And I'm completely in agreement. They shouldn't be going to 3 different colleges. And I've said that. And we need national legislation, I think, to fix that problem. But the problem, Pam, is that, yes, there are a lot of problems with intercollegiate sports. But if the answer is we just won't play high-quality intercollegiate sports, you're going to give up a lot of things that you and I care about. You're going to give up the chance for that college athlete to be both a good student and a good athlete at places like Stanford and other places. We learned in the basketball commission that if a student stays, this is why I don't like one and done. We tried to get rid of one and done in basketball. Couldn't do it because of the NBA. But if you if you make it through 2 years, you're 50% likely to come back and finish your degree. If you make it in 3 years, for 3 years, you're 75% likely to come back and finish your degree. Now, for some of those kids, that really is a way up and out. Not every college sport athlete just ends up on the street. An awful lot of them end up in very good jobs or coaching someplace. You know, there's a very good story that I want to tell, and I don't think she would mind my telling it. The Stanford assistant women's golf coach several years ago was a woman named Catherine Emery. Catherine came from Scotland. Her father told her, she went to the University of Arizona. Her father told her, the one thing you're going to do is leave with a college degree if you go to America. She played 17 years on the LPGA. She won twice. She said at about 35 or 36, she thought, I have no insurance, no prospects, it's time for me to go get a job. She saw an advertisement for assistant coach for the Stanford women's golf team. You had to have a college degree. Was she glad that she'd followed her father's admonition and gotten a college degree? So we tend to think about the bad stories. But I would bet you if you looked at the whole range, you would find more kids for whom that opportunity to be in college and have an athletic scholarship paid off more than those that didn't pay off. And we can fix some of the problems, but let's not talk about people who didn't make it.
But of course, each of the kids who comes here to play a sport, it's not as if they didn't come here, no one would fill that admitted student slot. And so I think one of the questions to ask is, you know, in what way is it worth it for Stanford to have 10% of its undergraduates be varsity athletes? You know, it's a much bigger cost for us than it is for a place like Ohio State or Michigan or Virginia.
Why is it a cost to have 10% of your student body be people who have excelled both in the classroom and on the athletic fields? Why is that a cost?
I'm not saying that I'm not saying that standing alone is a cost, but for every person we let in, who we let in because they're a good student and a good athlete, there's somebody who's a good student and a good musician who's not taking that spot.
No, but a number of good students and good musicians get in too. That's why we're well-rounded.
I don't know what to say about that, except that there are lots of ways people can excel, and those people don't get scholarships to come here. They don't get recruited to come here. They don't get the same level of accommodation for their doing the other thing they have a passion for. And I just am not sure why we should be treating athletes differently than we treat somebody who was an excellent high school debater or an excellent high school artist.
Because it takes more to be excellent athletics and excellent in academics.
Than to be excellent in music and excellent in athletics?
No. Give me. You know, I was actually excellent in music, so let me address that, because I was actually a music major in college. All right, and you're absolutely right. I spent 4 hours a day in a practice room. The musician students here spend 4 hours a day in a practice room. And I can guarantee you that, and I'm not talking about music majors now, I'm talking about people who just, I can guarantee you that there are things that they do not do in their college careers because they spend 4 hours a day in a practice room. Just like there are things that athletes do not do in their college experience because they spend 4 hours a day practicing their sport. The truth is that human beings, the greatest of human experience, is to have people, especially at a place like Stanford, who are excellent at a lot of different things. You know, Tiger Woods said once that one thing that he liked about being here was that he would walk across campus and somebody would say, "Doesn't he play golf or something?" Right? So I think our athletes are part of the student body. Their friends are not all athletes. And that's good for athletes and it's good for non-athletes.
I am happy to have athletes at schools. I went to a school that did not offer athletic scholarships. There were Olympians in my school as well. Not as many as at Stanford, but there were some. So it's not that I think athletics are bad. I did a lot of athletics in high school. I wasn't good enough, and I didn't have enough time to do any athletics in college. So it's not that I think athletics is bad. I think that a system in which we privilege athletics over all of the other ways in which students excel as an institutional matter is problematic, and I wouldn't choose to do that. But if we are going to do that, I think that it's hard to argue that those people shouldn't be compensated for the huge amount of money they're bringing in, which is the football players. And what you've been talking about, and I understand it's an economic reality of sports, that the football players have to subsidize the women's gymnastics team and the men's wrestling team and the like. And I just wish we were more honest about saying that there is a cost to those football players of subsidizing these other sports, and maybe that's why they should be paid. And telling them, well, you're going to get an education, doesn't actually compensate them for the risk that they're facing.
I think that's what the courts are saying. And look, you know, this is
And
where
we hate the system we're seeing.
This is where it's going.
Yeah.
But when you say they subsidize, I actually talk to a lot of our athletes. I don't actually think that's the way our football players think of what they're doing. I think you see them show up at women's basketball, and I think you see them show up at women's golf or at men, because they like being a part of a well-rounded program. So I didn't mean to suggest that the only reason to have football is to subsidize other sports. I think football, in its own way, brings the community together. So just to be clear.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think we may be talking a little bit past each other because you're so focused on the excellence that is Stanford, which I share a real pride in the university, but I represented women in a Title IX lawsuit against a university that I will not name here, where the football players, during their recruiting process, they essentially sexually assaulted a bunch of women at the school, and the school did nothing about it. And it's hard to say that those football players are really happy to subsidize the women's sports at that school.
Of course not. But there are always cases of bad eggs, right? And if you base your analysis on bad eggs, you're going to come up with an analysis that is tilted.
Yeah, but you're basing it on good eggs.
I don't think that most, I'm glad you won your case. But let's not impugn even non-Stanford athletes
I'm not
and somehow
suggesting
that they are people who had to go to court for assaulting women.
No,
et cetera.
I'm not suggesting that on average athletes are bad or the like.
That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make the point that this is really complicated by the fact that if you were starting from scratch, I don't think we would have developed the system we have, because no other country, including countries that have university systems that are equivalent to ours, Oxford doesn't have anything like this. Cambridge doesn't have anything like this. Sciences Po doesn't have anything like this. And it was a historical accident in the United States that a number of our most popular sports are so closely tied to higher education.
Pam, there are a lot of things that are unique to the United States and to the U.S. university system. A lot of things, including the way that we do government-funded research for innovation and end up creating the Silicon Valley. That's also unusual. So the idea that just because it's unusual, it's somehow not worth preserving. That's the problem that I have with that argument. Let me just make one other point. Look, yeah, we probably wouldn't have created it this way. You're right about that. But I study institutions. That's what I do as a political scientist. You actually never have tabula rasa. There's always something that was created, and you are dealing with that particular set of circumstances. So we don't have the option of going back to 1900 and saying, would we have created the situation, created the circumstances like this? We don't have that option. So we have two options. We take the system that we have, and I say it has quite a few benefits, including the breadth of the programs and the ability to have Olympic sports and Title IX and so forth. We take that system, and we try to deal with what I completely agree are certain dysfunctions in it now. And we try either through national legislation. I, by the way, don't mind the argument that maybe players ought to benefit from revenue. I don't mind that argument. But you either do that, in other words, you try to deal with some of the problems in the system, or you say we're just going to not have it. And my point is saying you're not going to have it, I think, is not an option that I would choose.
Well, I agree with you that it's not an option we have. Whether you choose it or not, it's not an option we have. My guess is that down the road, what we're going to see is schools at the top end, which is going to be like the SEC and the Big Ten, they're going to move to a system in which it's pay for play and people get to play for 4 years, and whether those people go to any classes or not is not going to matter to those schools very much.
We might well get there. I actually don't think that we are there yet, even at places that are not Stanford. And I just want to say, the idea, this is not your idea, but the idea out there that the more money you spend and the more you professionalize your programs, the more successful you will be. Ask Florida State how that worked out for them, right? They won one game. So it's not clear that the professionalization equals success. Some degree of professionalization is taking place. The other concern I have for college athletics is the professional leagues actually have protections that college athletics doesn't have. So the NFL has contracts. So if you do not want to play for the team under which you are contracted, you either play or they'll trade you. But if they don't trade you, you have to play. So there's nothing like the transfer portal, so to speak, in the NFL. The NFL has what's called rookie contracts. I have read stories about freshmen that are being offered exorbitant amounts of money without ever throwing a pass. The NFL actually doesn't do that. So in some ways, intercollegiate athletics is mimicking professional sports, but without some of the protections. And that's another piece that has to be fixed, I think.
And why don't you respond, and then I'm going to interrupt this fantastic conversation. Deborah may have a question, and then I think some of our students may.
Yeah, I mean, the question of what sorts of contracts schools ought to have, I mean, one of the things that has always distressed me the most about schools is they offer people a scholarship, and then if they cut them from the team, at a lot of schools, there's the end of your scholarship. They drive you
Not
off.
at most. Not at most. No.
Well,
Actually,
if you want to quit, they definitely take your scholarship away.
the NCAA, most Power 5 or Power 4 conferences have the 4-year scholarship. You get the scholarship.
Well, there are an awful lot of students who decide they don't want to play the sport once they get there. And there was a story recently about, I think it was, and this is an Ivy League school, so it's not a scholarship that way, but there was a woman who was a recruited basketball player. She got to Harvard, decided not to play basketball, and there's this story about the basketball coach coming and screaming at her about she didn't deserve to be in Harvard but for the basketball coach being in there.
There
which
are some
kind of
jerks.
worried-
There are some jerks in life. I agree.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Deborah has a
yeah.
question.
Oh, go ahead.
And
Sorry.
then we're going to turn it over to our students.
So I have a question, but remember, I don't know a lot about athletics. So but I do know that the world of sports is changing, and the world of college sports is changing incredibly rapidly, and the amount of money that is going to be available is we're gonna have to make some serious decisions. Condi, you had mentioned national legislation as one way to go, but we don't know whether that'll be successful. And I guess I'm interested in, supposing that's not successful, what are the points, and this is to you, but it's also to Pam, what are the lines we would not cross? When do we, and the reason I partly ask this is my own view is that we have kind of eroded some lines. I don't think we've broken anything yet, meaning we've eroded some things. The athletes eat separately. I don't think that's a great thing in a university. You want to bring people together. We actually do subsidize some of the food budget. That takes general funds. But where are the lines? And when we're talking about what could be happening with the amount of money that will be available, we're not going to be able to hold players. We're going to admit people who are going to leave if the transfer portals are, in full effect. Not everybody will leave, but we will have that problem. We'll be kind of under pressure to take more students from outside to transfer in to be able to mount our teams. Where are the lines? What are the guardrails, or where are the lines?
Well, for me, the bedrock is that you don't admit anybody to Stanford who doesn't belong at Stanford academically. That's the first most important red line. And I don't think that's one that we've crossed. And I think that we owe that both to the general student body and to the student athlete. Look, it is right now a bit of a cauldron about how you deal with the transfer portal, what it means in terms of NIL. I hope that here at Stanford, some of the NIL may look different. So, for instance, we sit in the Silicon Valley. The opportunity for a very good Stanford athlete who also happens to like engineering or computer science to do something with one of the companies here as an intern with maybe even a promise of future employment or the like. I think there are a lot of creative ways to use who we are and where we are to think about different ways to compensate our athletes with NIL. I mentioned the number of influencers, for instance, who, not athletes, just influencers who are making extraordinary amounts of money just by their TikTok channel or whatever. I can't see why there wouldn't be opportunities for our athletes to do a different kind of NIL than you might be able to do in the rest of the country. But for me, the bedrock is that when I stand in front of a classroom as a professor, and I am a professor, if I have a student athlete, I want to make sure that that student athlete belongs there academically.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say about what lines a school should and shouldn't be willing to cross. I agree with Candy that the minimum line that they shouldn't be willing to cross is letting somebody in because they play a sport who otherwise is not capable of being a successful student, which is not the same thing as saying, could they come here and simply manage to get through? It's, you know, and there are lots of people who shouldn't be at Stanford who are terrific athletes, just as there are some people who are terrific athletes who should be here. But there are lines, and one line I think is, at some point, the question may become, how much of the university's general funds do we want to give over to athletics? And, you know, especially in a time where we may be facing a whole lot of pressure on those funds, you know, we don't want to be a school that is spending a huge amount of money that could be spent on student financial aid or research or the like on an athletic team, no matter how successful.
So this has been great. We'll thank you at the end as well. There are 2 microphones, and I expect that not just members of the class, but people who are auditing are welcome to come to the microphones and ask questions. While they do that, could we put up the attendance question? This is the time, if you are a student, to point your cameras as you're doing right now and answer the attendance question.
Yeah.
And we have the first question here on this side.
Hello? Hi, I'm Colin. I'm a freshman. My question is for Secretary Rice about the scholarship debate. Obviously, I agree, athletes, you know, they have to devote an incredible amount of time to their sport, to the games, the practices, all of that. And so I understand the need to compensate them in some way. But they do receive a lot of benefits. They get athlete dining, which is, from what I've seen, extraordinarily better than dining for the, you know, most students who we're also working hard. We're using our brains in very challenging ways. And, you know, they also receive special accommodations where they can miss a third of their classes. And, you know, I think there's also some housing accommodations as well. And so I was wondering, sort of, where do we draw the line with these accommodations? Obviously, they're devoting a lot of time to their activities and their sports, and we should definitely acknowledge that and have realistic responses and not require them to essentially do as much as a regular student on top of their sport. But to me, it seems like there's just this kind of, there's this flood of accommodations for them, and I feel that I understand the dining option, I understand some of the housing options in the classes, given that we're in a conference that's across the continent. But with the scholarship question and the financial compensation, I don't quite understand why that also needs to be in place to the extent that it is. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a well-put question. So in terms of the scholarship, I think I mentioned at the beginning, I thought that the scholarship was the value proposition. I'm old-fashioned in that way. It's that the courts have changed that world in very important ways. I believe that accommodation should be there only if necessary, and we ought to be very abstemious in the use of accommodations and how we define necessary. So athlete dining. One reason that came about was they get out of practice at 8 o'clock, and by the time they get to the dining hall and you're 300 pounds, there's no food. Right? So I think something like dining, you can see why that's important. I'm hoping that we can figure out better ways to deal with the fact that we're in the ACC. You know, that was a necessity to be able to play high-level sports and not be in a non-Power 4 conference. But there need to be some adjustments. The travel is too much. Maybe it's a scheduling issue. Maybe it's the fact that Dallas SMU is also in the conference, so more could be done with regional. And I really think we really have to to go after that, because I am worried about the travel from a physical point of view, but also I'm worried about the travel from the academic point of view that you're talking about. Now, I think most of that problem comes in the first year or so. As you get into your major and can choose courses depending on where you are in the season. So if you're a winter sport person, your decisions about what you take may look different than if you're a fall or a summer sport person. You just don't have that kind of flexibility as a freshman. And so I hope we can do something to help our athletes in that regard, because they don't want, it's not like they want to miss classes. It's not like they're trying to get out of something. And so I think we need to try to be responsive to that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. I also have no idea about collegiate sports, as Dean said. So you both gave examples, both from something like the ACC, which is college kids playing other college kids, but then you also gave examples of something like the Olympics, which has nothing to do with collegiate sports per se. And something I'm not super knowledgeable about, but I've heard in a sport like tennis, where you're not necessarily on a team, so you could be on the varsity team playing other tennis teams, but you could also be playing in Wimbledon, which you're not necessarily representing Stanford. You're allowed to play, but you're not allowed to claim any prize money. So I'm asking your opinion on that, and to draw the difference between something, what you were saying with football, where the money does come to Stanford and it's used for sponsoring the other teams or for paying a super high salary to the coach, and should Stanford give them money? That's a separate question to if they're winning money from selling their jerseys, or if they're winning money from a competition that gives out prize money, are they allowed to take that? Mm-hmm. And is your opinion the same for those two kinds of payments?
So to start with the point you were making about the Olympics, one of the things is I think we're now seeing historically with college sports what we saw with the Olympics, which is the move from the idea that it was an amateur competition to the fact that now the Olympic athletes are professionals. And you actually see some really interesting changes in who's an Olympian now. It used to be that, all the swimmers were in college still because you couldn't make a living as a swimmer. Now, because you can make a living as a swimmer, you have 30-year-old swimmers, and we've learned things about when people's athletic peak is that are quite different than they used to be. Same thing with tennis, that we went from the amateur era to the open era, and there are rules now. There are still rules about, who can receive what kind of funds and still be eligible for college sports. That being said, one of the things that happened with college sports over time is all of this revenue was coming in and it went to the coaching salaries. And maybe that's where some of the mistake was, but that's an open market. So you're competing on that market. And I think Candy's point in part is Stanford has to do a bunch of things that Stanford doesn't want to do, because we're in a market in which other schools are happy to do those things. That is, we would not have chosen, there's no world in which we would have chosen to be in the ACC if the Pac-12 was still around. But the Pac-12 disappeared in part because they did a bad job of negotiating their television contracts, and as a result, UCLA and USC left, and at that point, the conference began to unwind. Which is just a sign that what's driving all of this is not anything about the educational mission of universities. What's driving this is the relentless audience desire to watch college sports, most of it an audience that doesn't actually have any connection with particular school, but just likes watching college sports.
My question is that, sort of back in reference to the difference between an athlete and, say, a musician, is because a musician is also putting in the time and also benefiting the community as a whole through their performances and everything else. Can you clarify why they don't need a scholarship and the same benefits that an athlete has? And also, if the argument is that, athletics requires more, it's just too much, you couldn't possibly do everything that a normal student would and athletics, how is that not sort of showing that athletics as it's done here is sort of antithetical to what Stanford expects of other students?
Yeah, I don't think it's antithetical. I think Stanford actually expects of its athletes what it expects of other students and. So that's the way to think about it. So I train in the Stanford Athletic. They let me train over in the varsity athletic training facility. It is sometimes inspirational and sometimes intimidating to train with 19-year-old world-class athletes all around you, right? So, but I get to do that. They're there at 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. We don't ask that of most students. And so we ask that they do that so that they can then go to class, finish their classes, go to practice, and then go home and do their homework. That's what we ask of the Stanford athletes. So my point is that we ask that they do the things that Stanford students do, and. Now, I actually, personally, maybe it's because of my own interest, I would have scholarships for fine musicians. I would. We do have or we did when I was provost, special admissions for kids who were math geniuses, right? People who won what was called the Westinghouse Medal at the time, and so forth. So we actually do give you extra points in your admission if you have certain special skills, certain special excellences. It's not always attached to a scholarship, although it might be attached to an extraordinary effort to recruit you if you are one of those students. So it is a continuum of what we do to bring a range of talents to Stanford. And you will get extra points on your admissions if you are able to do these other things. It's always a bit of a debate in the faculty. You know, should you be looking at these extracurricular activities? I don't mean intercollegiate athletics. Should you be looking at these extracurricular activities when you're making a decision between two students who have maybe relatively similar test scores and relatively similar grades? And our answer at Stanford has been, yes, that's a good thing. So I think we do ask student athletes to do more, or they have to do more in order to do their sport. But I think we still ask them to do well in the classroom, complete majors that are real majors, and many of them to complete some of the most difficult majors that we have.
Thank you.
Just one observation, though, of course, is we do give extra points in admission to people who have a wide variety of skills, but we then tell the talented musician, if your family makes $200,000 a year, you're going to have to pay something for Stanford, whereas we don't tell the talented water polo player whose family makes $200,000 a year, you're going to have to pay for this. And that's where I think the inequality that you're pointing to is real.
I'd do it for the musicians, by the way. But
I'd do it for the high school debaters.
Hi there. Thank you so much for a fascinating conversation so far. My name is Francis Pearman. I'm an assistant professor here at Stanford and a sport apologist enthusiast. I myself was a former collegiate athlete and a professional athlete for a number of years as well. I'm also a believer in institutional tinkering. That is, I believe that many of the issues that we're talking about today can actually be addressed with like small p institutional policy to make life a little easier, both for student athletes and non-student athletes on campus. My question is specifically about how the question of the professionalization of collegiate athletics relates to a broader conversation about the role of colleges and universities in our culture, right? We know that kind of the current administration has gone on record even of recently saying that, you know, elite colleges we've lost elite colleges, right? And that's certainly playing out with regard to a number of, we'll just call them challenges that universities are now facing, right? I've long sort of thought of sort of a curious question about how can it be that an elite institution such as the Stanfords of the world, how is it that we can have an elite institution that is also sort of broadly populist? That is like, how can we get folks who really have no access points to these colleges and universities to actually be supportive of them, right? In the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, for instance. Yeah. Why is it that in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan we have folks who are big fans of the University of Michigan, even though we know that is an elitist institution, right? And so my point or my question is, when we're thinking about the professionalization of collegiate athletics, can you talk a little bit about how sports functions as what we might think of as access points for the broader sort of culture, access points for universities to sort of occupy a space of sustainability moving forward in these kind of rocky political times? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take that one because I actually do think that there are a couple of things about quote, elite universities that are not always well understood in Washington, for instance, which is they may be elite universities, but they're not necessarily made up of elite people. The 20% of first gens that we admit to Stanford, the fact that we are geographically pretty dispersed, I think is not well understood. I actually think it helps that Stanford plays sports and can be seen in that context at a Clemson or someplace. I also think it helps that we contribute to innovation and technology in the country as a whole through having basically created the Silicon Valley. So I think the more different you are actually than some of our peers who were born 300 years ago and really still talk about what they were like 300 years ago, I actually think it's a good thing to be different. And I believe that the intercollegiate sports part of it and the representation in the Olympics, for instance, and others, is a part of the fabric of Stanford and a part of the identity and the image of Stanford. So it's a very important point. One of the questions that we've been thinking a little bit about among some of us is, should we be reaching out to different parts of the country? Not just if you think we're geographically dispersed, but still kind of city-bound. So how about rural areas? How many Stanford students are from rural areas? One of my concerns about America as a whole is we don't know each other very well. We have gotten to the place that, when 2016 happened, I actually had colleagues who said, maybe I should go to Alabama and see what those people think. If you have to do an archaeological dig on your fellow citizens, we have a problem. And so to the degree that these elite universities are not made up of elite people, I think we've got a better argument. And to the degree that we look different than the so-called elite universities, I also think we have a better argument.
Yeah, I mean, I took some of what you were saying to be that perhaps you can build support in the public for the research side of universities and for their innovation side from people who are fans of the university because they wear Nerd Nation caps or because they, are Ohio State fans or the like. And it's an interesting question. I don't know how you'd figure out whether somebody's being a fan of a particular football team or basketball team translates into their support for the other things that a university does. I'm just not sure
Yeah, I don't
how
know.
that. How that
I agree. I don't think we know. I will say
It'd be interesting to try and figure
it'd be
out.
interesting to try to figure out. The first time I heard the words Palo Alto, I was a little girl watching a football game in Birmingham, Alabama. Just to give you an example.
Thank you both for your time this afternoon. Dr. Rice, I wanted to ask you about student engagement with regard to athletics, particularly at Stanford. I don't think I'm alone among a lot of my undergraduate peers in having some frustrations with the just lack of engagement and student investment in the sports programs. I think obviously football is just not in a great spot right now, and I think that's indicative of a very limited student section and just lower bowls having vast swaths of empty seats. And it's a little bit frustrating, and I know that Stanford as an institution has a lot of different strengths, and we're not an SEC school. We're not going to have a raucous game day atmosphere, but it feels like when part of the appeal is that at Stanford you're able to get this incredible education while having a really excellent athletic community, that is something that the school could potentially invest in a little bit more. I'm curious if you see this as an issue, as something that Stanford really needs to invest more time and money in order to kind of build up student engagement, community engagement, and if so, how we can do that.
Yeah, I'm frustrated by it too. Right? I will say basketball this year has had more students, maybe it's because they're winning, but I was here in the Andrew Luck years when, in fact, the stadium was pretty full, not completely, but pretty full. I think we just need to work with student affairs, and I know that the vice president or the vice provost for student affairs is thinking about this and working with, Andrew Luck is now there in the program. Now, have dorm challenges on how many people can go to the game. Have your dorm walk from the dorm with the band. I'm taking some of these ideas from having been at Notre Dame. Walk to the game together. I was told that the student tailgates are too far from the stadium, so let's move them closer to the stadium. I really think it would be great, because I sometimes wonder what it's like as a player to walk into that stadium and it's cavernous and there's kind of nobody there. And these are your fellow students and colleagues, and so I would just really encourage every student to try to bring a friend and try to go to the games. The only times that our games tend to be sold out is when we play Notre Dame, and then like half the stadium's Notre Dame, which isn't good.
Great, thank you.
I mean, it doesn't bother me if students want to do something other than go to a football game on a Saturday afternoon. It just doesn't. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me at all.
Pam, I'm going to take you to the football game this Saturday.
Yeah,
Right.
Look, when I was an undergraduate, I went to football games, and I enjoyed it. But I also enjoyed occasionally doing other things on Saturday afternoons, and it wasn't a disaster not to have me at the football games. I mean, I'm more worried actually about student engagement in the following sense, which is when I go over to Treseder sometimes at lunchtime, I'll see a table of undergraduates sitting together, and every one of them is like this. They're texting somebody who's not there. And I think the face-to-faceness of college is a really important thing, that kind of engagement face-to-face. If it occurs at a football game, fine. If it occurs because people are all overlooking at the very strange art in the Anderson Center, that's fine with me. If they're at a concert, that's fine. If they're all just walking the dish with a friend, that's fine. What I don't like is the idea that people are sitting alone in their room watching endless cat videos on TikTok or the like.
Thank you both so much. My name is Yu Ching. I'm a senior. And most of my athlete friends tend to be Christian and conservative. And it seems to me, at least, that the athlete population is in general more conservative than the average Stanford student. So I'd love to hear you both kind of speak on how college athletics contributes to ideological diversity on campus.
That's an interesting point. I wouldn't have made the connection. I mean, there's the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I know that the athletes, very often the teams have chapel of some kind before their events. I wouldn't have made the connection that you did, but it may well be the case. I do think that, I don't know if it's ideological diversity, let's just call it diversity of viewpoint and diversity of experience. And to the degree that there is more of a conservative community there, that's good. That's a very good thing. I hear, and I hope that this is something that we can bridge, that sometimes the athletes feel that they're looked at as a little bit different. They don't want to be looked at as different, but they think they're looked at as different. Maybe it stems from some of what you're talking about. But to the degree that we are trying to have the broadest range of people, including viewpoint diversity, more power to it if you're getting more conservative Christian or other religious students, and not just Christian. I think we actually have a couple of, I know of a couple of Mormon, a couple of Muslim students as well who are athletes.
Finally, somebody on this side.
Hi, my name is Chase. I'm a senior, and I'm actually a four-year manager for the women's basketball team here. I just want to say thank you so much for the talk. It's very insightful. As a manager, I feel like I've gotten the inside perspective of what it's like to be a part of Stanford athletics. And as we all know, I think Stanford is lagging behind in NIL. And I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. Playing football at Stanford is not the same as playing football at Alabama. I mean, this season, one of our best players is transferring, I don't remember, maybe to Clemson, but it's getting harder and harder to retain these athletes that we originally recruit, just on the premise of Stanford excellence, the Stanford experience. I feel like that isn't enough anymore. I mean, it'd be enough for me, but I think it's hard to commit to Stanford knowing that you're turning down $1 million from Clemson or Alabama. What do you think Stanford could do to try and match the pace of NIL at other schools? What do you think they could do better?
Well, I think we are trying to, look, we live in a different world than before, and you're absolutely right about that. I think there are a number of reasons that we have had transfer portal issues, particularly in football, and some of it has to do with success there. But to the degree that it is because of NIL, which I think is also a factor, we have to be in the NIL game. I don't think we have to be in it in the way that a lot of schools are, where they're just shelling out money and telling people go buy your Porsche. I don't think those are the people recruit. I don't think those are the people that are really going to succeed at Stanford. But does there have to be some acknowledgement that NIL, which is name, image, and likeness, let's remember what it is, name, image, and likeness, is something that Stanford will support, will help athletes find, will try to help find opportunities for that. I think they're working very hard on that now. One reason for bringing Andrew Luck as general manager was to have a more centralized way to deal with some of those issues. So I think you will see that Stanford is catching up, if you will, but catching up in our own way. There are just some things that I don't think are appropriate for intercollegiate programs to do. When it comes to in name, image, and likeness or revenue sharing or any of it, we have to do it the Stanford way, but we probably have to do it. And so hopefully we're moving in a way that we can keep, because you're right, we recruit the needle in a haystack, right? We recruit the athlete who can play D1 sports and get into Stanford, and we can't afford to lose them. We have to find a way to keep them.
But I think there is this difficulty, and I think Paul and Condi, you know more about this than I do because you've done a lot of the fundraising. But when you have somebody who says, I want to give $1 million to Stanford for Stanford sports and the like, or I want to give $1 million, or it's somebody that the development people have told you is somebody likely to give a 7-figure gift, there is this question, do we try to get that gift as an NIL to keep a particular great student athlete here, or do we try to channel that towards either non-athletic giving altogether or athletic giving that is not about paying a particular student?
Well,
I think that's hard to figure out, right?
Well, I do think that an awful lot of the fundraising goes to general athletics and to scholarships. You know, an awful lot of our fundraising in athletics is for scholarships. But let me just say, I've done a lot of fundraising. If somebody comes and says, I want to give to Stanford Athletics, they want to give to Stanford Athletics. I might say, would you rather give to, I won't name a particular department because I don't want to put Deborah in a bad position, but just because they're not going to give to Department X, they're going to give to athletics. And actually, I think you will see, it's a point I made earlier, an awful lot of our biggest donors to the core mission of the university are also donors to athletics.
But would you like to go to one of those people and say, you know, we're running the risk that our #1 softball player is leaving. Could you pay her $1.2 million in an NIL to keep her? Would you do that?
We have had a collective, which is outside of the university, that helps define NIL deals for some of those students. Look, I think I've made very clear, I don't like this whole thing, right? I liked it when we were just giving scholarships.
Yeah.
But we're not in that world now, and I'm hopeful that the way that we will do NIL is both responsive to market forces, so to speak, but not so responsive to market forces that we're doing something that we're just kind of lemmings over the cliff along with everybody else, because I don't think some of this is sustainable in the long run. And a lot of places are going to learn that it wasn't sustainable, and they will have spent a lot of money that will not get them what they want. So someplace in trying to deal with the market issue is a place that Stanford can be. And again, I think there's some NIL deals that might look different for us.
So one thing some people have argued about is maybe universities should have sports teams, but they not be part, that given the way things are going, maybe that's, because we're in a period where, again, the amount of money that is flooding in is going to be challenging for us, even for us. And I worry that it may be you're going to wind up spinning out parts of
Well,
college
the
athletics.
argument's been made mostly about football, that football should be its own separate thing. But again, before we start pulling out pieces of it, I think we have to, I just finished teaching a class in which we talked about unintended consequences of what you thought were good decisions. And I think we know that this system is in fact a system. And if you start pulling out pieces, you may see that you've pulled out things that you don't want. And I go back to, I don't like it, but the way that we fund a broad intercollegiate program at this point is because of the media revenue, 85% of which we're told is earned by football. So it may well be, Deborah, that we'll get there, and there are some proposals on the table to do just that, to have college football, which, by the way, is already a bit its own thing. It is no longer an NCAA championship, college football. It's a college football playoff championship, which is a separate organization with a separate board and separate rules. So it's already pulling away. I think if it pulls away completely, we're going to be looking at the crash of some other very important parts of intercollegiate athletics. KJ.
Hello. Dr. Rice, Professor Carlin. It's very fascinating listening to you guys talk about this. I'm a former athlete, football player, graduated in 2020. Just want to give a little color from the athlete's perspective, some numbers, a couple stories. Starting with the locker room, I tell people this all the time, even in the corporate world now, that some of the most respected players in the locker room were walk-ons, and who are now 2-3 years in investment banking, started companies in the venture space, and they were paying their entire way through Stanford, which was pretty fascinating. And then I'll also say I'm from Southern California, didn't know a whole lot about Stanford growing up. If it wasn't for guys like Andrew Luck, Christian McCaffrey, I would have never made some extraordinary friendships with a lot of the students here who were doing extraordinarily fascinating things. And I speak volumes on the connection between, I actually push a lot of the athletes in my time here and now on integrating with the student force out here, because I really do think extraordinarily highly of them. And I think that fabric doesn't exist at Michigan, doesn't exist at Vanderbilt. I got a lot of friends that have played there as well. For some context on just like the current landscape, if you believe in the idea of a free market or capitalism, 127 million people watched the Super Bowl this year, in a country with roughly 360 million people. Talking a little bit about, I actually got super into NIL post 2020. It was my senior year. I'd gotten released from a team in the NFL. And so I've watched the formation of the market over the last 4 years. And it was fascinating to talk to head of football ops, at the time Pac-12 commissioner, deputy chief commissioner of the Pac-12, knowing that NIL was going to break. Also talking to Bernard Muir as well. It was pretty fascinating to find out Stanford operating budget is roughly $2.1 billion a year with an endowment of $35 billion. I'm somewhat a finance guy. I think we all know what that looks like in a 6% vehicle for 30 years. What was fascinating was actually the fact that I found out my junior year that Stanford football, I think, roughly all in, was making somewhere around $100 million. And their goal, actually, at the end of the year was to net break even, funding, 32 some odd sports, which was pretty fascinating, in line with Title IX, a lot of my best friends being Olympic volleyball players, the women's swim team, extraordinary, women's soccer team, extraordinary. So would definitely not want to see that fade in the coming future. And the last thing I'll say, which was interesting too, I mean, obviously you got vowed Victorians left and right, non-athletes everywhere you look at Stanford, but I'll plead the case for the Stanford athlete. Like, Coach Shaw was here for 10 years, extraordinary staff. I have a lot of buddies that played for 4 or 5 coaches in 4 or 5 years. Coach Shaw actually had a model where, like, he redshirted Christian McCaffrey, Heisman runner-up twice, best running back, I think, in the world. Andrew Luck redshirted. It was part of this vision of, like, get acclimated with the student body. You came here to be a student as well as an athlete. And obviously times have changed now, which is why we're struggling, because, you know, personal best interest is to potentially take $500,000 to secure, you know, your kid's future. I will also say the coaching staff on the recruiting front, like, I had some top wide receivers across the country that I would train with, and they wouldn't touch an athlete that wasn't in the ballpark, a football player specifically, that wasn't in the ballpark of 3.7 to 4.0 GPA, which I always thought was fascinating for football players all over the country to be able to, you know, partake in that. Lastly, question for Dr. Rice, who I think the world of. Looking at, like, the future landscape of college football, I think I kind of understand the current model is roughly $22 million is going to be rev shared to the athletes. 85% can go to football specifically. Do you see, like, the future landscape looking in line with the NFL in terms of, like, for example, you mentioned rookie contracts.
Yeah.
I signed a rookie contract for a decent number. Didn't see a penny of it. Got cut before week 1.
Yeah.
So, like, incentive-based vesting,
Yeah.
just like if you were an employee with stock options.
Yeah, I don't think that that's how this will play out, but I don't know how it will play out, to be quite honest. I think everybody is thinking about revenue sharing. Not quite certain about how to think about the split, how to think about women's sports and revenue sharing, although women's basketball is theoretically now a revenue sport. So, you know, we're working our way through it, is all I can say. I do think, as Pam has said, the courts have spoken about the university's obligation for players to share in the revenue that is produced in sports. I don't think it's a full understanding of how athletic programs work, but that's where we are, and I think we'll try to do something that is responsive to the market, but still where we can stand up and look at each other.
And I think it's actually going to turn out to be very complicated and difficult, because in a normal kind of revenue sharing, you would share the revenue with the people who are bringing in the revenue,
right.
which would mean, you know, in the 22 million, it would be going to men's football, at some schools to men's basketball, but probably not here, and women's basketball. But Title IX puts an additional spin on that, which is, if this really is about sharing revenue with students who play sports, it's hard. It becomes hard to say that male students who play sports should make more money than female students who play sports if it's a Title IX issue, which then makes everything much more complex.
Different. And I would just say, and then we need to get to this, young woman, but I would just say one final point about that. Look, I think you're right. There are a lot of complications with it. One of the things that will have to be figured out is the scholarship piece as well, because the other thing that the House settlement did was to take off what are called roster caps and say that you could increase scholarships. So you might increase scholarships to women's sports, which would be another way to address House. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
While we take the last question, let's put up the poll as well, but please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Atira. I'm a current student athlete, and I'm also co-president of the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. So a lot of the things that you guys are discussing today are super relevant among athletes. So it was super insightful to listen to what you guys have to say. And first of all, Dr. Rice, I just want to say it was really great seeing you this morning at 6:30 in the workout room. She was really getting after it, guys. My first question is for Dr. Carlin. I'm curious how you might see a process where we could delegate revenue to players, how you would see that being split amongst, for example, like your top wide receiver versus like your fourth line, like lineman who doesn't see much action. Would you kind of base that off of like air time or number of plays made? And then further on top of that, how would you see the values of equal opportunity of Title IX being upheld through that system? And then for Dr. Rice, assuming...
I think we have time for only one question because the class is nearly over.
Okay.
So I think there's one question they can both respond
We'll
to.
both respond.
Yeah, so I think I was alluding to that in the last colloquy I was having with Condi, which is it's really hard to know how you take this pot of money and divide it, because there are some schools that have been doing a kind of weird equal opportunity for everybody. So I think the collective at the University of Oklahoma is giving every lineman $50,000. And it's just, that's your position, that's what you get. There's some schools that seem to be much more concerned with, coming up with some formula that has something to do with athletic performance. And then there's this Title IX issue that overlays all of this, which is that the purpose of Title IX was to give women and men equal athletic opportunities, and this question of what you do with this new pot of money coming in is very complicated. I don't think schools have really figured that out yet at all. That is, whether what you should do is take the $22 million and just divide it among the athletes, on a pro rata basis. Should you be doing it based on who's a starter and who's a reserve? Should you be doing it based on which sports are getting the most revenue? Or I don't think anybody's answered any of that. All we know from the House settlement is it's going to be 22%. And
yeah,
that's it.
Right. I mean, I think all of those are considerations. I will say, keep remembering too, it's the reason I mentioned scholarships, is that another way to think about where the, quote, money goes is to also potentially increase scholarships, not just on the revenue share piece, but I think those are all big issues. The courts really left it to universities as to how this would be done. And I think there's going to be a learning curve. So what is decided this year may not be what's done the following year or the following year, because this is a lot of experimentation right now in a brave new world. And so one of the points that I'd make is some things that people are going to do won't pan out, and they may end up doing it in a different way.
So for those who didn't see the poll, there was some shift away from yes to no. Not mammoth, but significant. So before I thank you on behalf of all of our students, I want to thank you on behalf of Deborah and myself. I think that you have increased at least my knowledge of college athletics by an enormous amount. So thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us.